Welcome back to the Spectra Creative channel. I'm your host, Scott ToyGuru Neitlich, and I've been in the toy industry for well over 20 years and have had the opportunity to work on a lot of Hollywood movie-related toy lines. And I'm often asked what changes I would make to movies if I was in charge. I mean, I'm not petitioning at all to be put in charge of Hollywood. I would probably really screw up a lot more movies than I would improve. But from a toy perspective, I'd like to think I bring a very unique perspective because a lot of movies are made without thinking about the toy line. And I recently did a video specifically looking at DC Comics and highlighting a few properties in the DC comic portfolio that are kind of what I would call hidden gems that make really excellent toy lines to correlate with a movie, as opposed to movies that kind of back into a toy line at the end of it, where they try to make toys out of a movie, but it doesn't always work. There are definitely some properties in the DC portfolio that naturally have what are called toyetic elements, meaning they would translate really well into playthings and collectible things. So this time I want to change it around and now look at Marvel, since we looked at DC last time. And obviously, Marvel is doing really great in terms of movies. They've had 3 phases of very successful movies, and almost all of them have also had very successful toy lines. They've also been known for being big risk takers. Marvel has looked deep into their portfolio and pulled out some real gems that have turned into great action figures and collectibles. I mean, who knew Ant-Man would be able to sell toys, right? But it has, and it's done very well. Even Iron Man was a huge risk at the time. He was a very unknown property back in 2008, and they pulled it off. Because in a lot of ways, Marvel has really been fearless. They've known in their gut what makes a good movie and how to translate it into toys with their toy partners. So, I want to look at the Marvel catalog and bring to light some properties that I would say are very toyetic, meaning they are much more translatable into toy product than other properties. There are some properties that don't make good toys. Just a quick example from my experience, I worked on the Green Lantern movie at Mattel, and obviously, before the movie came out, it didn't hit box office requirements, but it looked like it was going to make a great toy line. It had things that would work well for toys. Also things like the Batman movie, the Lego one, also great for toys. And there are movie properties that are not as good for toys and just don't translate as well from screen into action figure. So that's kind of what I want to navigate. So let's take a look at the Marvel Universe, and I'm going to highlight a couple gems in their portfolio that if I was in charge of Hollywood, if I was in charge of Marvel Comics, that I would greenlight. All right, the first one is going to be that 90s hero, Darkhawk. Who is Darkhawk? Well, he's started off in 1991 as a kind of street urban superhero, kind of lined up to sort of be the next SpiderMan in a way, where he was a teenager who gained fantastic powers and had to deal with how he used them. The reason that he would really make a great movie and a great toy is because of really his look and his powers. Now, he's had a few different looks over the years. Even in his original comic book run, he was upgraded to a more sort of cosmic armor halfway through the 50-issue run. If I was going to look at doing a movie, though, I would not be looking at this version or even the modern version, which he's more of kind of a Guardians of the Galaxy character now. Out in outer space. A lot of his origin has been like retconned, and it's been changed a lot. But if you go back to the original series, especially the first 20 issues, they are amazing. I mean, those first 20 issues are honestly, I think, some of the best written sort of, length of issues that Marvel has done in the last 30 years. And it's very underrated. And he makes a great toy. He's been a great toy. He's got all the features that work for a toy. He's got a mask, he's got a symbol, and his symbol, his amulet, is also the source of his powers. Because by grabbing his amulet, he's able to transform from his human form, his alternate identity of Chris Powell, into Darkhawk instantly. He grabs the amulet, and suddenly he stops being Chris and starts being Darkhawk. dressed up in this awesome armor with an awesome helmet and these claws and shoulder pads and, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, it's a little 90s, but I mean, he's really cool looking and very different looking. And the transformation is instant, much like kind of when Black Panther puts on his outfit or Iron Man now with the nanotechnology. And his amulet is something that the villains are always trying to get, and sometimes in the comic book they did get it, like this iconic moment with Tombstone. Now, Darkhawk's powers are also what really make him a great movie hero. I guess he does now have the power to fly, but originally in the first 20 issues he did not. He just soared on those wings. Plus, he has that iconic evil twin that Marvel loves to use as the villain in almost all of their movies, where the bad guy is just a bad version of the good guy. In fact, he has multiple evil twins. There's multiple sort of evil Darkhawks out there. So that sort of checks off the Marvel movies requirement right there of having the hero face off against an evil version of himself. And his powers, again, he can shoot laser beams out of that amulet in his chest as his sort of offensive power. And he also has a great defensive power that his amulet can also project a shield. Although this seems to be used less and less in the modern Darkhawk comics. Again, I'm really looking at those first 20 issues back in 1991, which are how you tell his origin and where he was sort of learning the ropes. Speaking of ropes, he's also got a rope. He has a grapnel that shoots out of his arm and he can use for soaring and grabbing things. I mean, amazing, amazing toy features. Plus, the whole mystery of what he looks like under the mask. It's always great to have a little mystery in there. So that's my number one recommendation is to look at Darkhawk for a Marvel movie. All right, next up, Deathlock. And he's a little bit more well-known. He's been a member of X-Force, and he's had quite a few incarnations over the years. Deathlock has actually been around since the 1970s, and he's even been, he tends to be drawn mostly the same. He's a cyborg with a red suit with some wires and some robotic arms, and he's always armed with a gun. The specific version of Deathlock that I would target for a Marvel movie is the version, well, also out in the early 90s. I guess you could say the early 90s spawned a lot of cool characters that were coming out and being fresh. The version from the 70s is a little different. He's more of a time traveler from an alternate future, and there's all sorts of like alternate reality stuff going on, and it was a little bit more confusing. Basically, that was sort of pushed aside when he was relaunched in the 90s, so this is the version I would focus on. The version that was written by the late, great Dwayne McDuffie, who also created Static Shock and wrote a lot of DC animated series episodes, from Batman and Justice League. He's a great writer, and his take on Deathlock was awesome. He was able to basically revive the character, push aside most of the stuff from the 70s, and give him a fresh look and a fresh take where basically, it was the quintessential, man and machine. And he was able to update a lot of the old villains for Deathlock, like the Warwolf here, which was kind of a robotic cyborg dog that previously in the 70s was a bit more like, I don't know, kind of like the Jackal, one of SpiderMan's villains, but he was more human form. Dwayne, when he redid and reimagined the character, was able to update a lot of the concepts and just really make them more toyetic. Like, for example, the giant ants. I mean, come on. I mean, we all know Ant-Man sells. Well, why not giant robotic ants? That would be a great toy to take on Deathlock in the toy aisle. Now, the story, he's more or less RoboCop, but he came out before RoboCop. So, it's not a ripoff of RoboCop. RoboCop's more of a ripoff of him. It's the whole idea of a man trapped inside of a machine and trying to cope with his humanity and find a way to either get back into his human body or cope with the fact that he's now stuck forever inside of a killer cyborg. And of course, the man inside, Michael Collins, is a pacifist and finds himself stuck inside of a war machine. So you've got that whole conflict as well. Another great thing about the Deathlock concept for movies is movies have been trying to figure out a way to, I guess, do a movie about the internet for years. And, they've had some success, some failures, or not as big success. Deathlock was doing things with the internet before the internet even existed, or at least before it was mainstream. He called it the cybernet, and he basically had the ability to plug into this online universe through a phone jack, but through his finger, and he could use it to communicate with people and find out information. And so it would visually be a really cool way to show the internet and how Deathlock can kind of go inside of it. It was very revolutionary for its time. The other great thing he has going for him is the comedy. He talks to his computer, the computer that can talk to his human form on screen. And it's kind of like Iron Man with Friday or Jarvis before he became Vision. So there's a lot of comedy there. And he has been in the Marvel Universe. He's made an appearance on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., though a little bit different. So he's already there. So I would say upgrade him to feature film status, and you've got a really great toyetic movie that would work well. All right, last up, let's talk about Spider-Man. Wait, they've already made Spider-Man movies. What are you talking about? Well, not just Spider-Man. The property I would talk about doing is Spider-Man and his amazing friends, when he teamed up with Firestar and Iceman. This was actually my very first introduction to Spider-Man when I was a kid, watching this show from the late 70s, early 80s, and it is and was amazing. Now, obviously, Spider-Man has had a ton of movies and sold a ton of toys. He does very well from a toy perspective because he has all of those, toyetic elements, shooting the webs, wearing the mask, etc., etc. Kids can see themselves as Spider-Man. So we know Spider-Man works. What I'm saying is not just making a Spider-Man movie, but specifically teaming him up with Angelica and Bobby here because, well, one, you've got the precedent in pop culture, but Angelica Firestar and Bobby Iceman make great toys. And Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends really was the original Marvel universe. I mean, in the animated series, he met a ton of characters from Marvel and interacted with them. And while I know Iceman has had his fair share of screen time in the X-Men movies, he really only iced up in Days of Future Past, turning himself into ice and riding on an ice slide. This is really the iconic Iceman that we know from the comics and the cartoon, and we only kind of got a tease of this. Imagine seeing this all over Manhattan, right? Iceman creating these ice shields going around buildings and through Central Park. I mean, that's really toyetic. Plus, kids can really relate to concepts of elemental characters, meaning fire and ice, because fire and ice are always present, keeping food cold, keeping food warm, fire pits, campfire. So children understand ice and they understand fire very well, and they can relate to the two extremes. And Bobby Drake here, Iceman, has a very visual power creating all that ice stuff. And Firestar, well, aside from the fact that she was one of my two childhood animation crushes, the other one being Teela from Masters of the Universe, she also has very, very cool visual powers. And again, much like the whole fire and ice thing, her fire powers represent a very easy to comprehend concept for children. And her uniform itself, also, very bright yellow, bright orange, with the red flowing hair, would work great visually as a toy and stand out in the toy aisle, very easy to spot. In fact, she would work great for girls' lines too, with her, flowing hair and her mask, would be a great doll. Her powers, very visual. Not only does she fly around and create all of these cool fire trails as she goes, and the energy that forms around her hands, but in the cartoon show, she formed a lot of sort of like fire objects, like a fire lasso. And wow, I mean, come on, that is amazingly toyetic. How cool would an action figure of her be packed with that? Not to mention the fact that on the show, both Firestar and Iceman had one of the most iconic transformations in animation of all time, where they both powered up using their ice and fire powers. I mean, right up there with He-Man as far as the transformation. And then, of course, they also have that secret headquarters, which looks just like a kind of teen lounge / bedroom, but with the touch of a button or on the mantelpiece, twisting a trophy, it automatically becomes their secret headquarters with computers and all sorts of cool stuff. What a great playset that would make. And, of course, you can't forget about Mrs. Lion, the Angelica's dog. I mean, talk about a plush opportunity and a sort of cute sidekick opportunity. Who doesn't want? I mean, come on, who doesn't want that as a cute toy? So Spider-Man and his amazing friends. That's where I would take Spider-Man next. I would team him up, tap into the nostalgia, and tap into the toyetic elements that this property has. All right, so that is what I would look at if I was suddenly put in charge of Marvel Studios and asked to explore what the new phase of movies should be from a toy perspective, as well as a storytelling perspective. Obviously, all of these characters have had toys, but they would work great with a major motion picture. So hey, Marvel Studios, Disney, if you're out there, look me up on SpectraCreative.com. One of the big services I offer is Toyetic Movie Review, where I help studios and toy companies ensure their product are more toyetic from the get-go instead of backing into it at the end to sell better toys. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments. A subscription and a like is always appreciated because that helps tell YouTube to share this with more people, and that's what the internet's all about. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys at the next time.